We live in a geocentric universe. The Sun and Moon orbit a stationary Earth. The argument for a geocentric universe is based on a few key pieces of evidence, including the Red Bull space jump, airplane flights, clouds and wing patterns, gyroscopes, experiments by reputable scientists, the lack of evidence that the Earth rotates, and lastly, cosmic background radiation of the universe. A lot of this evidence is from looking at the atmosphere. Note that the atmosphere is a separate system to the Earth, driven by different forces. They move independently of each other. An Earth rotating to the east should not cause the atmosphere to rotate to the east. If the Earth is rotating, this should be most evident at the equator. But all the evidence indicates that the atmosphere moves slowly relative to a stationary Earth. There is other evidence to consider, but these are relatively less conclusive and open to debate. So what? If the Earth is stationary and does not rotate on its axis, the heliocentric model is impossible, and the Earth exists in a geocentric universe. The Sun must be rotating around the Earth. The Red Bull sky jump in 2012. A man took a balloon to the top of the atmosphere. He parachuted back down and landed a short distance from his departure point. On the other hand, if the Earth was rotating, he would have landed over 2,500 miles away. In conclusion, this proves that the Earth does not rotate on its axis and is stationary. In theory, the Earth is rotating sufficiently fast at the equator relative to the speed of both airplanes and bullets, that pilots and snipers should adjust their planned trajectories to compensate for the Earth's supposed rotation. But this doesn't happen. Pilots and snipers assume that the Earth is stationary when planning flight paths at the equator. No adjustments are made due to any supposed rotation of the Earth, as no rotation is evident. For example, if the Earth was rotating on its axis, then at the equator, the Earth would be rotating to the east at a speed about twice as fast as modern airliners can fly. So, airplanes would not be able to fly east faster than the Earth rotates, and would appear to fly backwards. This does not happen in reality. Therefore, the Earth cannot be rotating. The wind and cloud patterns seen in reality would be impossible if the Earth was rotating. So, the Earth cannot be rotating. Air circulates around the globe. In short, hot air moves from the equator to the cold poles via atmospheric cells, which is independent of the Earth's rotation. Wind in the high-altitude jet stream flow to the east in both hemispheres and do not vary with latitude. On the other hand, the Earth's supposed rotational speed varies with latitude, being fast at the equator and stationary at the poles. If the Earth was rotating on its axis, there is no explanation for how winds can flow to the east faster than the Earth rotates to the east. There's no explanation how wind can maintain constant speeds relative to the Earth's varying rotational speeds at different latitudes. This is impossible, especially as winds and the Earth's rotation are driven by different forces. In conclusion, this proves that the Earth does not rotate on its axis and is stationary. This is what smoke from a moving steam train looks like. Clouds can form when hot air rises vertically upwards. But these clouds look like they are above a stationary Earth. Gyroscopes maintain their position despite any changes in their surroundings. For example, airplanes use a gyroscope to show a constant horizon on its instruments, despite any changes in the airplane's position or orientation. Stationary gyroscopes show no displacement over time, indicating that the Earth is stationary. Two famous experiments indicate that the Earth isn't rotating: Michelson-Morley and Airy. Both experiments measured the relative movement of light. Both were reputable scientists who wanted to estimate the speed of the Earth through space. Both scientists concluded that the Earth was stationary, that the Earth was not rotating and not moving through space. Both experiments have been independently verified and remain uncontested. Airy's failure was an experiment in 1871 with telescopes. Airy found that the trajectory of the starlight is not a straight line to the telescope on the Earth, but the starlight is at a slight angle to the telescope. In turn, this means that the telescope and star are moving relative to each other. But it was unclear which was moving and which was stationary. In the experiment, Airy tilted the telescope and filled the telescope with water. Airy found that the starlight hit the bottom of the telescope. Airy concluded that the star was moving and that the telescope was stationary. The explanation is straightforward. The star moves, but starlight travels with a straight line trajectory. This experiment is called Airy's failure because Airy set out to calculate how fast the Earth was moving through space. Instead, he concluded that the Earth was stationary. On the other hand, there is no conclusive evidence or scientific experiment that proves that the Earth is rotating. In particular, evidence from pendulums and the Coriolis effect are ambiguous and disputed. The explanation of how the Earth started rotating is total speculation. The ancient Egyptians proved that the Earth was a sphere, but not that it was rotating on its axis. Pendulums are not proof that the Earth is rotating. Evidence shows that pendulums are aligned to the celestial sphere, stars, not to the Earth's supposed rotation. The Coriolis effect is not evidence that the Earth rotates. Air circulates around the globe. In short, hot air moves from the equator to the cold poles via atmospheric cells. The prevailing trade winds move in all directions in both hemispheres. All cyclones spin anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere, and they spin the other direction clockwise in the southern hemisphere. The Coriolis effect claims that the natural path of storms from the hot equator to the cold poles is deflected east by the Earth's rotation. This supposedly causes the cyclones to spin in the different directions in the different hemispheres. But the logic is false. A problem is that the winds and storms move both north and south in both hemispheres. So, according to the logic of the Coriolis effect, storms should spin both clockwise and anti-clockwise in both hemispheres. But this doesn't happen. Another problem is that it's illogical to claim that storms can be affected by the Earth's rotation when airplane flight paths aren't. Also, storms and clouds look like they are above a stationary Earth. In conclusion, the Coriolis effect does not explain how cyclones spin. The logic is false. So, the Coriolis effect is not evidence that the Earth rotates. Research and data show that the cosmic background radiation of the universe is aligned, and that the Earth is at the center of the universe. The data is not disputed, but its interpretation and significance is contested. In conclusion, there is plenty of evidence that the Earth is stationary and is not rotating on its axis, and therefore the explanation can be a geocentric universe, where the Sun, Moon and stars orbit a stationary Earth. It is mathematically feasible that the Sun and planets orbit the Earth in a manner that is consistent with what is observed in reality. Thanks for listening.